Hello and welcome to What Lingers, the podcast where we uncover the questions behind people's stories. I'm Christian Figueroa.
And I'm Liz Melchor, and we are the team behind Storytelling Lisboa, where once a month, 10 storytellers get on stage in front of 200 people and tell true and personal stories related to a theme.
Hi Liz, I am so excited about today's episode because as we mentioned last week, we have a bonus episode. This is going to be totally different from all of our episodes. There's not going to be a story. We're going to have some talking about crafting your story and telling your stories on stage. So this is really nice. I'm excited about it.
This is totally like a geek out over storytelling episode, and I loved recording it so much.
Last week's guest, Skye, has come back, and Skye is very experienced on the stage. They are an actor, a writer, they ran a theater company for a long time. Like, they even taught acting, so pretty much the most experienced person maybe we've had on our stage. They've won for their storytelling at the Moth, and so we just thought it would be great to pick their brain.
Okay, so let's listen what Skye has for us. All the juicy tips and tricks for the acting world, actually, which is really interesting because it's going to be applied to storytelling. So let's get into it.
We start off the conversation by talking about something that absolutely everybody has to deal with. Well, I mean, most everybody, I think. Definitely me. Stage fright.
So some people just love getting on stage. I am not one of those people, which doesn't mean I don't love performing and love being on stage, although I mostly prefer film because the audience isn't as big and so I don't have the stage fright. So my experience of being on stage, the first thing is I had this obstacle to overcome of stage fright. And I know where the stage fright comes from in my life, but it didn't matter if you're shaking and you can't do what you can do, right? As a performer, I know what I'm good at. I know where my talents are, but the fear will shut that down. And you will also leave your body. So in acting, they say, oh, I was in my head, right? And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make sure I didn't go into my head. And I started by doing acting classes, and we always did warmups. So you have to warm up your breathing, you warm up your voice, then you warm up your body so that you're loose and relaxed. And you bring everything to this fine point of concentration. And the concentration is because as an actor, often I had to memorize 100 pages of text. That was normal. So if I lose concentration, I can't remember my lines. So that meditation helped with that. So I learned the warm-ups and I started using yoga. And I would do yoga and meditation for a couple of hours before I went on stage as an actor. And that's a lot, right? That's a lot to have to do, but that's what I did. And then I had this experience as an actor, and I would have it periodically where I was so present that it was like there's so much adrenaline when you're performing that I was so present and so adrenalized, and it was this peak experience. And I would know that I was a channel. You'd be like, yeah, I was good tonight. But it would come and it was like I would embody it. I would explode it. I would tell the story through my emotions, through my movements. And then the next night it wouldn't be there. And I wasn't phoning it in, but I would be in my head and it was unpredictable. And I went on this quest for how do I get to be present and have that experience of being so connected. And that experience, I can tell you, I would feel connected to every cell of my body, to every person in the room. In a theater with 300 people, if somebody dropped a pin in the last row, I would hear it. Like that level of aliveness and awakeness. That's the reason to be an actor, right? Is that you come alive in this unreal way. And I love that. And I also really love the experience of connecting with other actors. I was a writer already, and I did acting classes while I was getting an MFA as a playwright. And then I was like, no, I just want to be an actor. So I switched schools and went to Sarah Lawrence for theater. And I found out about this technique called the Meisner Technique. And it's a co-creative technique where you find your presence partly through co-creating with another actor. They are your focus. And you allow yourself to respond to them organically and without inhibition, which means that sometimes when you're learning to do this, you're not liking them and they're not liking you. And you have to be able to let that be a moment that passes.
Can you give like a concrete example of the Meisner technique so I can more understand it?
Yeah, I can even do it with you.
Okay, do we try it? Yeah. Okay, cool. What do you do?
All right. So the basis of the technique is I'll talk you through this, but you'll close your eyes and you'll feel your body. I can only do it with one person though.
Okay. Should I do it, Christian?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Close my eyes and feel my body.
But I'm going to explain what we do after that. And then after that, you will snap your fingers when you're ready. It's saying, I'm present, I'm here, I'm ready. And you open your eyes. And then if I'm ready, I open my eyes and I say the first thing that I notice about you. And that's our script. So I might say, you're wearing a black shirt. And then you would say, I'm wearing a black shirt. You just changed the pronoun, right? To make it, you're talking about yourself. And then we just go back and forth. So I would say, I keep saying, you're wearing a black shirt. You keep saying, I'm wearing a black shirt.
Okay.
So the reason we do this is we do this to make language meaningless, because language and thinking about what we say is a lot of intentional intellectual work. We want to get rid of that so that all we're doing is exchanging emotions. So the first thing is we concentrate on each other. I'm looking at you. I'm looking into your eyes. I'm trying to feel you and sense your emotions. And you're doing the same with me. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, obviously, in person, it would be a different experience.
It's different in person. And then every time that I notice a change in you, I'm going to let it affect me. For example, if I say to you, you're wearing a black shirt, just say, I'm wearing a black shirt.
I'm wearing a black shirt.
You're wearing a black shirt. Say it again.
I'm wearing a black shirt.
You're wearing a black shirt.
I'm wearing a black shirt. But hold on. Wait, no, let me just pause for a second because I feel like I'm overacting.
Yeah, I would say flatten it out a little bit.
It's like I feel like I'm trying to give you a reaction.
Think about it more that we're just trying to connect, and the connection is about the concentration.
Yeah, interesting. Because I'm thinking, even unconsciously, I'm thinking, oh, I need to act a certain way, which I guess this whole thing is about abandoning that and tuning in really to how I feel.
Yeah.
Okay, this is interesting. Okay.
And to build this connection. Now, what we're doing, this is the first step. So it's going to be more flat. It's going to be more neutral. It's going to be a lot more about concentration. As you get better about it or better at it, you can, without acting, have bigger responses to each other. And people who have chemistry naturally just affect each other more. But we can do this. We won't do this now. You can't. We're going to have 2 minutes. But I studied this and I taught it. People are screaming at each other. They're falling in love. They're getting extremely intimate and quiet, all without a script, all with to start off with stupid language. And you do that so that when it comes to performance, you're in your body. You're not doing anything that isn't authentic. You're not trying to act. You're living.
Yeah.
It's called living truthfully under imaginary circumstances.
Yeah, I get it. I think it sounds like it's a way to abandon language and tune into your emotional bodily state in relation to another person. Whereas meditation might be more in relation. I'm trying to tune into my bodily state alone. So I don't know.
Yes. Yep. And there's another technique that I also teach performers about tuning in just to yourself. But in Meisner, you are the object of my meditation. My job is to let myself do whatever I do, but my focus is you. It's a very generous technique. All I care about is connecting with you and sensing you and being honest in how I'm reacting to you. Because if you think about, like, when you talk about, I feel like I have to act, right? I feel like I have to produce an emotion. When people do that on stage or screen, they suck. It's bad acting, right? Authenticity is what's good.
Totally. And then so because these techniques are coming from acting where it's like you're being authentic in the role of somebody else with somebody else's words that you've memorized or whatever. And so how do you translate these techniques into personal storytelling for the stage? And how's this helpful for you?
So there's two things with it. I always say I Meisner the audience. So in terms of the Meisner technique, what I have learned from acting, how it applies to storytelling. When I got up and they introduced me and I stood there and I looked at the audience and I took a breath. And what I was doing was I was sensing into my connection to the audience. And that's a way that I ground myself every time I tell a story. I don't have an acting partner, right? I'm not playing with another actor who maybe is trained the same way and we know what we're doing. I'm just being with the audience. So I start by taking a breath and sensing the audience. And I do that because it grounds me and it means that I will be authentic and connected. It also means I'll be more relaxed. And it also means that I don't have to think about things like the laugh curve. So the laugh curve is if you have a laugh and it gets bigger and bigger, you can't talk over that and be heard. So you have to let it reach its crescendo, start to drop, and you start to talk about here. But if I've connected to the audience, I don't have to think about the laugh curve. I can feel it, feel what they're ready for. I can feel if I have them or not. I can feel if I lose the connection a little bit.
And how, because you said you have stage fright, in this first moment where you take your breath, you connect with the audience, how do you manage the addition of the stage fright?
So that's the part that's separate from the Meisner technique. And I do it before I go on stage. And I'm going to use the 4 points of presence. So the 4 points of presence are feel your body, breathe. When you leave, when you go into your head, which you will, because people do, it's a natural thing that people do, you just notice, oh, I've gone into my head. All right, I'm here. And then the other thing is to notice the world as it affects your senses. You're being present with what is. It's very meditation based. And what is for me is that I have stage fright. So I am breathing and I'm noticing that my stomach is clenched, that my hands and feet are cold. Like I'm just breathing and feeling it and being with it. And almost inevitably what happens is it starts to not hold me as much. It loosens up.
To almost accept and focus on it weakens its power, maybe.
Yes. When you fight what you feel, it makes the feeling stronger and it creates this kind of blockade of resistance. Whereas if you just say, I'm feeling this, here it is, it can move. Because I used to say this when I taught acting. I was like, feelings have a very short half-life unless you tense against them, and then they can become permanent.
Inevitably, people always tell me, oh my God, I'm so nervous to go on stage. And I'm like, the nerves, they start here and then they go here, but you stay in it and then it goes back down the mountain and you calm down. I think so many fears that we just tense around. And so we never let them have their natural wave where we realize, oh, we can get to the other side. But that's what you do with your stage fright, right? You accept it, but you get on stage anyways.
And I keep feeling it. If the way I would say it, and I was trained this way, sometimes people, they'll get up to storytell, they'll be like, wow, I'm really nervous. And they let the nerves be expressed through their voice. And that eases it for them. I don't want to be nervous, but I am. And if I let myself be nervous, even if it shows in the first couple sentences, it passes. Whereas if I keep trying not to feel it and keep trying to hide it, it might last the whole story.
And when you're doing a personal story for the stage, how do you prepare in general, but also because we just had another guest on the podcast and he told us he practices for 4 or 5 hours for his story and he just redoes it over and over. And partly he does that because he wants to be able to connect to the audience, and preparing at that level is what allows him then to be like, I know everything that's supposed to come out of my mouth and I can relax. And so the preparation helps him be able to prepare. But what about for you?
I write the story first
On paper.
on paper. So I write it out once and then I shut down the file because I don't want to memorize it word for word and I don't want to be thrown if I say a word out of order. And then I practice it in different ways. And for maybe 15 minutes, a half an hour. And I do that 2 or 3 days before I'm going to tell. And then every day I do that again. And each time I tell it out loud, I tell it a little differently. I keep discovering the story every time I tell it. And then by the time I actually tell it in front of an audience, I'm used to the fact that I'm still discovering the story. And it gets to be that the points, there are things that are always the same, like the points that I need to reach. I know what the structure is. I know what the climax of it is. If there's a joke that I think is really funny, I'm going to tell it every time. But I also never tell it the same way twice. So I keep the life of improvisation.
That's a very good way of seeing it, as let this story to be alive in you. Also because we repeat this a lot, like the story happened to you already, and you know what happened in the story. And every time we tell stories to our friends, it's never the same story. We always add a little bit, or there's a scenario. The context where we're telling it is different, so we have to a little bit adapt it. So this is really nice. And something about your story, at the beginning it was just this fun story about feeding pop brownies to the nuns, and then it became very emotional, and you were open and very vulnerable on stage, and you can feel how everyone is getting into this, like surfing that wave with you. Everyone is like laughing, bursting, and then we all feel that we are going into a different direction. And I think this is just a beautiful tool of using comedy or fun or being funny to deliver difficult stories. But I think probably when you are comfortable enough to own your story, you are able to make it lighter for the audience or for yourself, because you've been doing that for yourself for a long time. So would you mind sharing a little bit of that? Is it the fun part of the story, something that you use mindfully, or it just happens to be that you are a funny person? And is this a resource that you use for your stories normally when they're like this heavy emotional component?
I have a range of, I would say, tragedy to comedy within me.
Okay.
And most of the time, I tend to, as a human being, serial comedy is what I do. Although I can do broad, just funny, especially wacky physical comedy. Most of the time, what I write and what I perform is comedy about serious subjects, serial comedy, that has pathos in it. And it's natural for me to go somewhere heavy and then tell a joke. In my life, I do that. And there's, in that, listening to that story, there's a point where I say, and I say it with my tone and my kind of bearing, it always is, I don't go to a really dark place. But I do say dinners with my family are typically that my father comes home drunk or late or both, and my parents are fighting and my brothers and sisters are arguing. And I could feel the audience go, oh,
yeah.
I felt that in the audience. And then I say, but this night, everyone is very quiet. And there's this huge laugh. And there's a way in which it's bearable to take in the harder information with the humor. And it's also true that the humor opens our hearts so that we can feel the tragedy more. So that's how we use that technique. But I don't think you have to. It exposes our wounded underbellies, right? And I don't want to tell a story that isn't processed enough, because then I'm going to walk away and I'm going to be traumatized by my own telling. So I want to make a choice about what I am ready to tell and how I am ready to tell it. So that's for me. And then there's also, what can the audience bear and where do I want to push them? So sometimes I'm going to make a choice to say something risky, meaning vulnerable for me, because I believe it needs to be heard. So I'm going to challenge myself to say it, and I'm going to challenge the audience to hold it. But I think the key to this is self-knowledge and really gaining experience, because the only way you learn is by making a mistake, right? And you go too far and you're like, wow, that felt like crap. I've had moments where I've been like, that's what it's like. I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah, like a vulnerability hangover kind of thing. We had another storyteller come and she gave us a workshop and she said something. She said, tell a story from a scar, not the wound. And I thought that was a nice metaphor for it, because you sort of risk damaging yourself, I think, when you talk about something that you're not ready to get a range of reactions to. But you also, I think, the audience can feel the unprocessedness, and it's actually not a pleasant experience for anyone. And yeah, do you have any specific tips on like how you know you're ready for something difficult to be shared? Or
I really loved Philip Seymour Hoffman. And he used to say, if it's not scary, I don't want to do it. It's about risk and the titration of risk. So if we're talking about the story, my story that I told at Storytelling Lisboa, the thing, if that story was completely finished for me, then why would I tell it? It can't just be a scar. It has to be something that you need to tell. If you don't tell a story you want to tell, you tell the story you need to tell. It's like going around the campfire again. If you're just telling something for entertainment value, it's not going to pull on the heartstrings. It's not going to create the same level of connection. From the story about the pop brownies, that in a cocktail party, whatever setting, that I wouldn't unpack, is that I felt guilt and shame my entire life for giving a brownie to this woman who ended up, she pulled me out of my family. She actually came to my house, took all my clothes, brought them to the convent, washed them, and brought them to my room because my mother wouldn't wash my clothes. And I fed this woman a drugged brownie. It was not fun to carry that. And that was the edge that I had going into that story. And now, after telling the story, I have so much more self-forgiveness. So I picked a story that had a little bit of something that I needed to tell and that I needed to forgive myself for.
yeah, I like how you put that. Like, you need to tell stories you're ready to tell and that have been processed, but it's what's the interest. And I've told stories that I'm almost like over, and it's not as interesting for me personally, because it's like there needs to be something slightly unresolved, but it can't be too much, right?
Yeah, it's exact. That's why I say it's all about self-knowledge. You had the next topic was going back, and I actually prepared, I think I did 3 stories. I prepared 3 stories off of that topic. And I was like, yeah, I shouldn't tell any of these. Plus, my new girlfriend was in the audience. So I was like, yeah, she doesn't know any of these stories, and that's going to change a relationship. So that was going to make me more nervous. But I could also, one of the things is you start to prep the story and you can tell how it feels in your body.
Absolutely. I was going to go there. I think like when I write that story for the stage, I know if I started writing it and like, I want people to like me, or I want people to think I'm a good person, or I'm already trying to hide the actual story in the actual facts. And there's something there that probably I'm not ready to share, to be vulnerable enough to be completely honest and completely raw on stage, because I'm already trying to change the story. So that's what I know. I'm not ready to share the story. Or sometimes I start crying during the story, but it's just a good releasing, healing crying is, okay, this story can go. So that's the preparation indeed helps us to know if we're ready or not.
But that's an interesting thing too, because it's like this weird tension where you need to, in some ways, you need to think about the audience, but then you also can't overly think about the audience or overly try. I think if you try to curate yourself, to be shown in a certain way, I love that is an indicator that you're trying to maybe hide something. There's something else there. And also, I think an audience can feel that, can feel the try hardness or the shielding. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think it's brilliant that the minute you notice yourself trying to please, you're already off your truth, right? And that's probably because it's a truth you're not ready to tell. And I think that's equally true about humor and style. I was talking about performing, and it's acting that I was talking about more than storytelling. But every time you get up, you have a choice to make. Are you going to serve the gods of ego or the gods of humanity? And ego is when I tell a joke because I want to laugh. Look how funny I am. Humanity is when I tell a joke because it's comes from a place of joy in me, and I'm sharing something about, aren't we all so absurd? That's very different than look at me. And the look at me is I'm thinking about how the audience is going to react. I'm not thinking about the story and the truth and how much can I tell safely and how connected am I going to be to myself and all those really important questions.
It makes me think of, we were just talking to another storyteller, and he was talking about how he loves to get on stage because he used this word. He said, the pops. He loves the pops. And what he meant by the pops, I don't know, the word was great, and he kept saying it, is when the audience laughs, when the audience giggles at him and it connects with him in that positive way. And so I'm just wondering, as somebody who has experienced both the pops of the audience, like connecting in those funny moments, what's the difference for you when you feel the audience connecting in the funny moments versus the more emotional moments?
I think that the fundamental is sharing and connection. So when I feel a sharing and connected humorous moment, there's a kind of, I think I like bubbles.
Pops.
Yeah. And when I experience that I'm getting vulnerable and I'm opening in a different way, it feels like a spreading. I can feel that I'm spreading, and so are the people who are witnessing what I'm doing. But the sense of sharing is the same. For me, joy is always bubbles. It's like these bubbles that just come up, and vulnerability, I always feel it in my chest, really literally like an opening in my chest.
I like that explanation because it's like an opening, and then in that opening, you can connect in the wideness to the audience. I don't know. Okay, if you could give only 3 tips to a brand new storyteller who has a story, but they're feeling unsure, they're feeling scared, what would your top 3 tips be?
Prepare the story out loud and feel it in your body. Breathe and be connected to yourself before you get on stage, and feel secure that you have a beginning, middle, and an end.
Great advices. I feel like the structure gives us the permission to explore different paths while we're sharing the story, because we know where are we, where we need to go, and how we need to end the story. And I was thinking when you were saying about difficult moment of your family coming to the dinner table and then being laughter, and it's like we can have that power of guide just the audience and let them know that it's okay, and you can be with me in this because I am okay already. So, like this, you cannot talk bad about my family, but I can talk bad about my family. When we're on stage, it's basically, you're giving us that permission of, you are sharing a very raw, difficult story, but you are laughing at it, so I might laugh as well. And that's a tool we can use just to guide the audience as well on where are we at.
And they have to trust us. So we have to build trust from our very first sentence, right? That you're coming on a journey with me and I'm leading you on this journey. So I'm building trust. It's a journey you want to go on. And I'm not going to take you somewhere that neither you or I can tolerate, handle, be hurt by, that neither you nor I are going to be hurt by where we go. in my lead.
And this is so important in the sense of trust and safety, because since the beginning of storytelling in this book, we've been arguing about the safe space, whether it's a social space, it's a safe or not. And we come to the conclusion there's not such a thing as a safe space, and we've been arguing this a lot, because we cannot control humans, and you cannot control yourself sometimes. How can you control other people? But also to make sure where you're sharing your story, because as you were saying, if I was telling this specific story with a different audience or different people, I might tweak it a little bit and not deliver something that someone is gonna give me like a backlash or something. And we have this storyteller came to stage several times, and every time I felt like he was going deeper in himself and like bringing a difficult story, and every story was just more deep and harder to listen and harder to process, until one day he actually told me, like, I healed so much by sharing these stories, because on your stage I was able to tell stories that I had never said to anyone. And that for me was life-changing. He's older, had probably several scenarios, different places in different cities around the world, and he never felt safe enough to share his stories until he got to Storytelling in Lisboa, and until he shared several stories and he was sure enough that this audience was safe enough for him to tell the most difficult story. So I think that's the sense. Of course, there is a process of getting to know yourself on stage, and there is a process of getting to know the stage where you're telling a story. So in a sense, also it's a risk. And again, we're really appreciative of you, because you came for the first time and you were already being your true self and your most honest, vulnerable story, which is not easy all the time because of that. We don't know who's listening, who's in the audience, and how they're going to react.
I will say, and part of the reason I think I'm here is that I felt that it was the safest space I'd ever told a story. And I'm experienced, right? And I was a slam poet. I was on the slam team in Boston. Like, I've performed a lot. And there sometimes an audience is like stepping off a cliff. You just don't know. And I could tell that this was an unusual space. And I agree with you that it is almost impossible, I think probably impossible, to make anything 100% safe. But you can make it safer, and you can make it very close to safe. And a lot of that is consciousness and communication and consent and instructions. I was a teacher, and I've also been a producer working in consent-based spaces. And sometimes you have to call somebody out who's breaking the rules, right? That's part of maintaining safety. So it just felt like there were lots of reminders about safety in the night. And you can always feel that people are bringing their best selves to those kind of environments, right? Whatever they might do somewhere else, here it's not going to fly, and they know it.
Yeah. And I think all of this is a reminder that the story doesn't exist completely separated from the audience and from time, because I've told stories on our stage in Lisbon and then on a different stage in Vienna, and the whole experience was different, even though probably the words and even my internal state for a lot of it was similar. And also, just a note to people who maybe have tried storytelling and it didn't go that well one time, like the next time you do it, it might be completely different. Right? To take those risks, that maybe it's not always going to be unicorns and rainbows. We've only had one person ever afterwards who told me, like, oh, I think that wasn't for me. They told me that the experience wasn't for them telling a story on stage. And I was like, okay, I totally understand. But then about a year later, she signed up to tell another one. And I was so happy that she could try again, because I do think that it can be different audience, the night, yourself. There's just so many things that go into it. And I think we should probably draw this conversation a bit to a close right now. And I'm just wondering, as opposed to acting, what have you learned and gained
from doing personal
something
storytelling?
so profound about sharing our lives with each other. And what I find is that what I share in personal storytelling, which led me to do an hour and 15 minutes solo show, which is a very long personal storytelling, I get to claim myself. I get to own myself. And I get to leave the country of other and enter the country of connection. And so there's this claiming of me, and I don't think we can claim ourselves without connection. And so there's this unbelievable expanding freedom that is more permanent in storytelling than it is in saying the words of someone else's script. There's a lot of freedom in that too, but it passes. What I have told about myself in public belongs to me in the world in a completely different way. And it's healing and it's fun. And the community that it builds is remarkable and unique.
That's it for this episode of What Lingers.
Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And also follow us on Instagram at Storytelling Lisboa to keep up to date.
What Lingers is a podcast from the team behind Storytelling Lisboa and is produced by Johnny Bunyan. He's amazing.
Thank you so much for listening and join us again for another edition of What Lingers.
See you next week.
So some people just love getting on stage.